As Catherine said, my name is Adolfo Garcia. Lots of familiar faces here for those who don't know me. I am one of the people working on SIG release on Kubernetes. We work on the release tooling, which includes all of the supply chain security tooling that powers the Kubernetes releases. I am also the maintainer of a couple of the initiatives in the OpenSSF, OpenVex, and Protalum. And most importantly for this talk, I am also one of the maintainers of the OSPS Baseline. I'm also an avid cycler. I like riding my bike. Starting this year, I started a new small company called Carabiner Systems. The idea of this company is that it's building the integration of all of the technologies that we have been working on the supply chain security space to bring everything together in a single coherent solution that can put everything to work. And since I have a very short time, I want to try to convince you about 4 assertions about the CRA and open source software. The first one is that actually being a good CRA citizen as an open source maintainer, in this context, what I mean is me as a maintainer of open source projects, being a good citizen is actually a good thing for me, for the ecosystem, and for the users downstream. So in front of us, we have 2 choices as maintainers of open source projects. On one end, we can treat the whole CRA storm or happy path, whatever you want to call it, coming at us as a bad thing, or we can see it as an opportunity to grow our ecosystems. On the gloomy side, whenever there's a vulnerability that gets found by one of the manufacturers, that is the end users of our projects, you can have a scenario where the fixes lead to each of the manufacturers coming up with new patches of their own to fix and comply with the regulation to fix the vulnerabilities. They each may take a different approach fixing the patches. They may choose not to contribute the patches upstream, and leading to mostly unmaintainable forks on the manufacturer side. Because remember, the CRA requires you to share the patches, but it doesn't really require you to go through all of the hoops that the open source projects have in order to merge them upstream. So if you produce a patch hosted in some forgotten FTP server, you're technically complying. Again, I'm not a lawyer, but that's my interpretation of the law. And then, on the other hand, we have like the happy path for the CRA, where we can coordinate, and then we can work together so that to channel all of that energy of the companies that are being forced to help us fix the security vulnerabilities, and channel those into our projects, leading to the opposite, where one patch fixes everything, and those patches get merged into the projects. Many organizations can contribute if we communicate properly. Organizations may take turns on who fixes what and coordinate, and it's a better division of work. And the most important thing for us as maintainers of open source projects is that you get free work from companies. So the choice is we can do nothing and lead to the gloomy scenario, or we can coordinate, organize, and communicate better, and leverage the power of companies being forced to fix vulnerabilities and having them in our projects. Now, doing nothing is not what we have been doing. So 1 year ago, here in Amsterdam, well, not yet 1 year ago, in December, a bunch of us came here to start thinking about that relationship between open source projects and manufacturers in a 2-day workshop organized by the OpenSSF, which was great because it brought a lot of different minds, a lot of the right people you see here during those discussions. And at least to me, the most important takeaway from that day was that we identified that, this is a second claim, the relationship between manufacturers and open source projects is almost entirely a supply chain security problem. Because it involves things like SBOMs and vulnerabilities and all of those technologies that are supply chain. I don't have time to go into that, but you can debate me after that if you have other opinions. I would love to hear them. Now, the third one, and I think this is the most important, and this is In order for us to channel the energies from the companies and really leverage that work that they will be doing to grow our open source projects, there needs to be this golden dialogue happening between open source projects and the manufacturers. And it goes like this. So on one hand, you have the open source maintainers. These, and I include myself in this group, are mostly people who mostly talk code. Let's call it like that. On the other end, you have the manufacturers, which are using the open source projects, and they mostly think about products. So we need to have a dialogue between the two. Now, in order to communicate, the first message that goes is that projects need to communicate their structure, their ways of working, how they operate in a language that the manufacturer can understand so that they can work on the patches and then contribute them back to the open source project. Now, this has a lot of, like, you may be asking, why should we do that if we're open source, we're not obliged to do anything? Well, if you put yourself in the shoes of the manufacturer for a little bit, you need to think that the manufacturer is not only working with you, it has a lot of dependencies, and all of those dependencies have to also, respond, and they have to be able to understand how all of the projects deal with open source contributions. So if we all communicate clearly, the manufacturer will be more motivated to contribute the patches upstream. Now, the biggest challenge is that the messages need to go through a series of semantic field meanings, semantic fields. The meaning of the message needs to go through all of these semantic fields, and this is where the tools are really important. So, because if we need to craft a message and transform it in such a way that pierces through all of the semantic meanings so that whenever one side that speaks code gets to the ears of the other that mainly speaks product. So if we break this down, the first level is the current security practices. So as a project, you may be already doing some security intentionally or maybe not even intentionally. But for example, you have choices for each of the security features that you add to your projects. You may be signing with GPG keys or with Sigstore. You may be generating your SBOM in one format or the other. You may be producing end-of-life information in OpenEUX or in Security Insights. Or you may be producing advisories in CSAF or suppressing exploitability information with OpenVex. Now, this is where the baseline comes in, because the baseline grabs all of those security features and basically groups them into logical tasks that you have to do. We don't care about implementation. Obviously, we have opinions, right? But we establish only the goals, and then you implement them as you want. And then, more importantly, the baseline groups all of those requirements into a catalog with identifiers that we can use to do other things. Now, this part in tooling, we got it solved. Like, my company has been working for the past year on this project called Ample, which is a policy engine that takes in total as tested data about everything in the baseline that you can imagine, from SBOMs, provenance attestations, whatever. And then we transform that into an assessment that tells you which controls of the baseline you are complying with. Now, the next step is that you need to take those controls in the baseline and translate them into CRA equivalents, into the CRA equivalents. And this is so the idea is that each of these controls do not make you don't make you compliant, but inform your compliance. So a manufacturer needs to have a view of their supply chain in order to understand which components are breaking compliance. This is the next step that my company is now working on. The idea is that the final layer is actionable tasks. In the CRA equivalents, we're talking about the language that an auditor may understand. But for engineers at the manufacturer, they need to have actionable tasks. And this is the problem space that we're currently focused in. Like, if I take some of the CRA, like some of the controls, how do I translate those into actual suggestions, actionable information for the developers to implement? So once you cross all of those language barriers, then the manufacturer may think, okay, so now I can understand how the project is structured. I know who the person to contact is. I know how their contribution process is, where to file like issues or vulnerability reports, and then it makes them easy for them to contribute back. And finally, the last one is that automation and aggregation is key. So you may be used to compliance data in PDFs or documents or things like that. But in this case, since we're talking about a very complex mesh of dependencies, we need to make sure that the information gets out there in a machine-readable way. And that's why we're discussing ways in the baseline project to produce that compliance information in attested documents. Because when you think about it, a manufacturer not only has one project, they may have many repositories and products and whatnot. So they need to be able to do this at scale. And yeah, so just to recap, these are the 4 things that I hope I could convince you. First, being a good citizen is a good thing. All of the relationship between open source and manufacturers is supply chain security. Enable the dialogue between projects and manufacturers. And finally, automation and aggregation are key. So thank you. I have a few slides, like if you want to check how Ample works and the links to the baseline project or whatever. And I'm happy to announce that as of today, Ample reached beta 1, so it's great if you want to check it. Yeah. And yeah, so thank you.